Okay, we're going to throw the screen up there.
If you want, I can say we're going to give it another couple of minutes.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you taking some time out of your day, your busy day here today, to join us on this webinar. We're actually going to start here in just a couple of minutes. It looks like we have a few late stragglers coming in, so just bear with us, and we'll kick it off here shortly. Again, for those that have just joined, we'll be kicking off the webinar here in just about a minute. All right. Again, good afternoon, everyone. We appreciate you taking some time out of your busy day today to join us on our BIM 360 Glue Model Management webinar. My name is David Pace. I'm an AEC account manager here at TPM. I'm responsible for all policy and pricing changes that happen in the Autodesk world, making sure that our clients are up to date on all of those changes and making sure that their Autodesk portfolio is in good standing. Running today's webinar for BIM 360 Glue is Dan Warren, who is one of our senior application engineers. He is responsible for all things Revit and BIM. Of course, that's just a quick synopsis of what he does, but he is the go-to individual, or one of our go-to individuals here at TPM that knows BIM 360 and Revit in and out.
Thanks for that intro, Dave. Let's go ahead and keep it moving. So why don't you cover our offerings here at TPM, and then we'll get started.
Great. Sorry about that. Didn't realize I had control of changing slides. So we do find that a fair share of our clients aren't really aware of everything that we do here at TPM. Of course, in the AEC industry, our clients are aware that we fully support Autodesk portfolio, really covering the breadth of all of their different products. But some of our clients aren't aware that we have other divisions, specifically a manufacturing division that focuses on SolidWorks and also actually Autodesk Inventor programs, as well as a document and print solution that focuses on small and wide format print solutions, and even a color lab in each of our three main locations, if you will, that we can do prints through. So really over the past, well, four and a half decades, we've kind of transitioned into just a printing company, which is what the TPM stands for, the print machine, over to a full technology company to help out the local industries. So should you have any needs that kind of fall outside of the AEC spectrum, please do let us know. We're happy to get someone in contact with you that's a specialist. So I will be moderating today's webinar, if you will. If you have any questions, if you expand the control panel on the right side, I believe it defaults on the right side of your screen, there's a drop-down box where it says questions. In that box, feel free to ask any questions throughout the webinar. I will try to answer some of those questions if I can. If it's a little bit too technical, there'll be a couple of times during the webinar where Dan will ask me if any questions have come in, and he can address them at that time.
Thanks, Dave. I really appreciate that.
My pleasure.
So, and if I get a little off track here, just make sure you remind me to check in with you if we got any questions outstanding.
Will do.
Yes.
Will do.
All right. So just a quick overview of our agenda. We've got a lot to cover today, so I want to get right into it. But we're going to start with just a real quick overview of the BIM 360 Glue solution. And then we're going to talk about some specific workflows as well as project administration. And then the area from project administration down through the merged model management, we're going to be spending, that's going to be the meat and potatoes of our presentation. We're going to be spending a lot of time talking about considerations you need. And I will be bouncing back and forth between products. So brace yourself there. There is a good chance we may have a technical issue as I'm working with PowerPoint, BIM 360 Glue, Revit, and the GoToMeeting tool, right? But we should go all right. And then we're going to end with some useful tips and tricks. And along the way, of course, if you got questions, please don't hesitate to ask, right? So just a quick overview, what is BIM 360 Glue? And you should be fairly familiar with this, considering this is a more technical presentation. But in case you're curious or you were completely unaware, BIM 360 Glue is a cloud-based model aggregation tool, which provides real-time collaboration and team-based coordination for your pre-construction through construction execution workflows. i.e. it helps support coordination and clash resolution as well as constructability reviews and things like that, right? So it fits right in there between from pre-con all the way through construction execution. What we are going to be focusing on mostly today is project administration. And basically, you all should have seen this slide at least once before. This is sort of the typical BIM 360 Glue cloud-enabled coordination process, where each one of our coordination team members works as they are available, and those changes are pushed up to the cloud so that instantly all of those changes are made available to the rest of the project team. They can just go directly into BIM 360 Glue, check the clash test, check the coordination results, and see as work is progressing how things are going, right? So we can actually monitor these, and we'll talk a little bit about how to do that just a little bit down the road. But this is sort of the environment we're working in. Now you can actually use a hybrid of this environment in a more traditional sense. So let's say you were a BIM manager and you had another team member who, for whatever reason, couldn't actually get into Glue, couldn't work. You can still serve as a model aggregator, where basically a team member would send you the model and then you can manually upload those models directly to BIM 360 Glue. And we'll talk about some considerations with that and why that matters. But the idea here is Glue is a very flexible workflow. It allows us, or it's a very flexible tool that provides us access to varying tailored workflows as necessary per project team, because no one prescribed workflow works for every project team, right? So when we're at the beginning of the workflow lifecycle, we set up our project and we invite in our BIM 360 Glue members, right? So this is the process of inviting them. You send them the invite. And then generally about this time, you want to have a kickoff meeting. Now, you could have that kickoff meeting prior to the member invite, or you could do the invites at the kickoff meeting. But generally at the kickoff meeting, this is where a lot of really important things are going to happen. And our next slide is going to talk on that. And then from that kickoff meeting, we go into actually bringing the models into the cloud, combining them, and running our clash test. But with the focus on that kickoff meeting, there's something important I want you to understand, or I want you to consider, right? So first is it's really important to understand everyone's modeling medium. And what do I mean by that? Is not all project members are going to be modeling in Autodesk products. They may be modeling in Tekla. They may be modeling in just another 3D modeling software. Yeah, it's possible you could be seeing SketchUp out there. Anything's really possible. But Glue does give us the ability to manage many different types of file types. But if you don't know every team member specific file medium, then it can really set you up to have to run into some gotchas down the road, right? Second is documenting your workflows. Just like we saw on the previous slide, it's important to document the workflows. Like, how are we going to be resolving these issues, right? How are we going to be sending files out, files going in and out, things like that? And how are we going to be resolving issues, documenting those issues, things like that, right? That needs to be written down and understood by all the team members, right? Otherwise, you'll end up in these situations where one team member who may or may not have gotten that email that said, please put your markups in here for clash resolution purposes, and then all of a sudden they're creating more work for the project team than they are contributing to the project team. Document your standards, and this includes naming conventions, which I'll come back to in a second, because naming conventions are kind of a soapbox of mine. And then really, really important is to establish your expectations early, right? So as a project manager, and this is really kind of what we're going into, we're going to be managing a project team, right? These people are going to be coming together, bringing their fire protection, their electrical, their mechanical, the architectural, structural models together to resolve these issues. So it's important that everyone knows what their expectations are. What are the key deadlines? What are the key milestones that we have to hit within the project schedule? Who is responsible for what? That's a very big one, right? If somebody is responsible for, and we're going to talk about trade overlap or discipline overlap here in a little bit, who's responsible for that wall? Who's responsible for that light fixture? These things need to be identified, need to be discussed, right? Especially if you have multiple trades that are working side by side. And finally, RFI documentation process, something you need to have documented so that if you're using Glue to supplement the data in your RFI processes, how are you doing that? Where is that data being stored? And we'll talk about all that when we get to the file management structures within BIM 360 Glue. And finally, the last two, understand LOD requirements, right? Are you working at 300? Are you working at 200? What's the requirement? Because there's big differences in implication as far as the amount of work required for a level 300 model versus a level 400 model, right? Or if a client dictates they want a full-on 400 level model, then that's going to require a lot more modeling, a lot more coordination work, a lot more resolution, right? And that's going to have a huge impact on your schedule. And then finally, this one kind of applies to everything we talk about. Begin with the end in mind. I love this phrase. Basically, the idea is every time you got to make a decision, stop and think forward down the line on the project. What do we want to get at the end? How are we going to get there? And be considerate about how your decisions, if you're running the model, if you're running the model coordination process, or if you're just participating in it, what are you doing and how is that going to impact the workflow, right? So this is the workflow that we're talking about specifically. And I took this from the BIM 360 Glue Coordination Toolkit, which is online at the Autodesk website. And this sort of lays out the sort of typical daily activities of the clash coordination process, or coordination revision, or coordination resolution. So the idea is we've already brought our models together. Those models are then updated. We run clashes. And at this point, it's just simple of, did we resolve the issues? Did we not resolve the issues? Can we resolve them, or do we need to get third party involved, right? And then it goes out, and when it's completed, we track that with our tracking logs. And then we talk about whether or not, and it's up in the upper right, this is very important, but often gets dropped due to time constraints, is what we're doing working, right? That's a really important question you got to ask yourself, both as a project team and as a coordination manager if you're running the coordination process, right? So you can kind of see the flow here. We've got the sort of cyclical daily activities that are going on in the background, right? So this would be in a traditional construction coordination environment, the MEP, the electrical, just resolving those issues. The plumbing guy just resolving the issues he can. He sees a small issue in the clash coordination, he just resolves it, he moves on, and when he's done doing his work, he glues up his model and pushes those updates out, right? And the purpose of this is to make those onesie, twosie items, those easy, low-hanging fruit coordination issues, just resolve those throughout the week. And then as a team, we can use that coordination meeting to focus on the big ticket items. That's really what we want to do. When we've got all the people together in the meeting, we want that meeting to be as productive as possible. All right. So let's talk about discipline overlap. This is really important because oftentimes, you've got the same element occurring in both models. The examples I have here are the structural and the architectural walls, the plumbing fixtures that appear in both architectural and plumbing models, or the electrical fixtures that appear in both architectural and electrical, right? These are just a couple of the examples. It's important that you, as the project team, understand who's responsible for what. And when you're pushing your models up, you don't want redundant data to appear. So I like to use the shear walls as an example. In the architectural model and the structural model, that element is going to exist in both models. Either that occurs because of the copy monitor command that's used by a structural engineer, or because they're using the architectural model and they're just taking those elements over and they're using them to flesh out the rest of the structural design. But the idea here is whoever's responsible ultimately for the placement of that item should be modeling that item, right? So if an electrical contractor is putting together your electrical model, he should absolutely be putting those electrical fixtures in there. Now, I'm not saying don't have the architectural light fixture locations in there in the architectural model, but at least have them turned off before you do your clash coordination. That way you don't end up with duplicate, you don't end up with false positives, or you don't end up with too much data or too many clash issues, because you really ultimately want the person who's in charge of putting it there to be the one responsible for making sure that the clearances are set and that everything jives with the rest of the coordination team. So let's take a quick moment to talk about naming conventions. First rule of naming conventions is keep it super simple. That's very, very important, right? So there's a couple examples right there. You can see we've got building, level, trade, or trade, level, area, or number 3, level, trade, area, right? It doesn't really matter how you do it. It just matters that it's consistent, and it matters that you enforce it as a team. So if somebody's pushing models up, or if someone's not following naming conventions, it's up to the whole team to make sure that this is enforced. And this is really important, right? Because you'll see when we get into the Revit workflow and we're pushing a model up, naming convention really does matter. So I'm going to take a quick pause here. I know I'm moving pretty quick, but I want to make sure we got time to check for questions. Dave, do you have any questions?
Nothing has come through yet.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll keep moving then. So this next slide's about model organization. This is really, really important, right? So it doesn't really matter how you organize your model. It just matters that it's organized and it's consistent, right? You can organize by level or you can organize by area. It doesn't really matter, right? And there's lots of tools in Revit to control this. But the idea is that for every single model that comes in, you're cutting them at the exact same scopes, right? And I'm getting ready to show you kind of how we can control that in Revit. But first, I just want to show you in Glue. So let me switch over to BIM 360 Glue so I can show you how we can manage or how we can organize those models. So I'm in BIM 360 Glue here, and I'm going to pull up the list view of our models. So right now, I've got each trade has its own folder. And this is a pretty straightforward setup. I mean, you can break this down further if you wanted to and have subfolders within each trade for levels if it's a large building. But the concept here is we want it to be very, very clear that each model, where each model goes, right? So the level 1 mechanical model goes in level 1 mechanical folder, so on and so forth. And we're breaking a very large building into smaller pieces. Now, in the example building I'm using in this webinar is 6 stories. So it's a pretty sizable building and there's a lot of data to manage. If you're doing a smaller building, that's one of those considerations as an admin you have to kind of work into your plan. Are we going to be able to manage this as one big federated model, or are we going to be managing this in smaller chunks? Typically, you'll end up breaking it out in chunks. And a lot of times I see that the coordination efforts tend to be structured very similar to the project documentation, unless it just gets too detailed and it has to be broken out. Now remember here, with any one of our models that we're uploading, it's easier to take a model that's already up there and break it into 2 smaller pieces than it is to try and take than try to bring together two smaller models, because it's going to really mess up your coordination and tracking efforts, right? And then when we're ready to start bringing those models together, we're going to talk about merged models here. This is what we're going to do, is we're going to go to the add merged models, and then you come through here, and this is why naming conventions are important. If I follow my naming convention well, I can just quickly go down here, and then my level 1 model is always in the same place regardless of my trade. I can also use my search and filter tools down here to help me control this. So if I've got a lot of models up here, and let's just say I just need the level 1 model, enter L01, and it shortlists my models within this folder. All right, so this does make it easier, and then basically you just check these and bring these together, right? So I'm going to bring these two together real quick, the structural and the architectural model, so I can show you alignment. Alignment's really important. So we're going to say arc and structure level 01. So oftentimes when we're bringing models together, even though we're using shared coordinates by default, they don't necessarily always come together this nice and neat, right? So I've got my architectural model and my structural model brought together. When we're bringing these together, what I generally do is, if they don't come together properly for whatever reason, it sometimes is a lot easier to just zero out the model than it is to try and find that one model that's out of place and then put it in there. And what I mean by that is, typically what I'll do is I will choose a structure, like the structural model is a good example. I'll come over here and I'll pick the structural model and I'll use my transform to zero out that model. And the idea here is setting this to 0 helps it's just an easy way of getting everything in the right place, because we know in Revit, everyone's using the same project base point. Therefore, all the models should come together. Now, sometimes they don't, and they still need a little cleaning up or adjusting. So if you just zero out all the models, it ends up putting that base point in the exact same location for all of these models. And additionally, once we've done this at the merged model level, it pushes that back so that the base model knows that it's been transformed. So when you update that base model, that level 1 structural or that level 1 mechanical model, I don't have to go back through and adjust it again, right? So let me go back over here to PowerPoint. So that's how we can manage our models, or we can organize our models. So now let's talk about Revit. Right, so this is a really useful workflow, and this is how I manage my Revit models when I push them up to BIM 360 Glue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over here to Revit, but the idea is we're going to go from a floor plan to a 3D view and then back up to BIM 360 Glue. And there's some considerations we have to make along the way. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you over here on the lower left. You can see I've got my floor plans. I've created a floor plan that is a type called BIM 360 Glue, right? And in the name of that floor plan, I use the word glue. And the whole reason I do this is using glue makes it a lot easier to identify the correct floor plan, especially when we're working with an MEP model where we've got multiple trades aggregated together. So I come up here, I make a floor plan for BIM 360 Glue, and then what I do is I go to my view range. Whoops. Go to my view range. Oh, that's right. I got to be in the floor plan. There we go. Go into my view range, and this is where I set my model up. So what I do typically is I set the bottom to the current level, and then I set the top to an offset from the first level. So in this particular model, level 2 starts at 20 feet. And I set this up at 20 feet. Now, I do have the cut plane set here at 20, but I found out recently that this doesn't really matter regardless of trade. The next step when we orient our view, this is going to take the bottom and the top, and it's going to use those to create the scope box of our 3D view, right? So we go through, we set our bottom and our top for our view range in our glue level 1 range, or glue level 1 floor plan. And then I create a level 1 architectural 3D view And this is also a BIM 360 glue type. Now this is really important because you'll see when we push this up, models are the interface for pushing models up is organized by type. This will make finding this level 1 model easier. So then what do? I right click on my view cube, orient to view, floor plan, and I'm going to come down and remember where I had glue in the name of all those floor plans. This is why I do that, so I can find it out of all my different level 1 floor plans. So I click level 1, it updates the view, it sets the crop region, and I can see right there I've got a perfect slice of my model from level 1 up to level 2, and I can rinse and repeat this workflow for all of my different trades, all my different discipline, regardless. One thing to note before I do push this up is you want to hide things that you don't want in your view. So this is where the visibility graphics tool comes in handy. Usually I recommend using this filter. So if we were doing an architectural model here, what I would do is I would turn on the architectural model, come down here, shift click, toggle them all on visible, and then I go through and I go to all my structural items, and I'm going to come through structure, and I'm going to turn off all the structural items so that they don't appear. Things that I don't want pushed up in the architectural model, right? And what's the advantage of using the visibility graphics override? Well, once you set this per your needs, regardless of mechanical, electrical, piping, structure, architectural, you can come up here to view and say this is a view template. So then once I have that view template created, if you look down here in the lower left, all I have to do is once I've created all my different 3D views, right click and apply that view template. And it'll apply that view template to all those different levels, right? So just a quick refresh, we're going to create a floor plan, use the view range, use the view cube to orient our 3D view to the floor plan, and then we're going to use a view template to go ahead and make sure that we're hiding things per our standard, right? So like in this example, I probably wouldn't need the furniture turned on, so I could go into my visibility graphics, come down to furniture, and we turn on architectural, turn off furniture. You see all the furniture is hidden because we don't really need to worry about furniture during coordination. And now this view is ready to push up. So let's talk about the BIM 360 add-in. So here, this is where we're going to click on the glue tool. And this is going to bring up our BIM 360 plugin, our BIM 360 glue plugin. So the first thing we have to do is you have to select your host. And then from your host, you select which project you're working in. So this would be this large medical center in this example. And then here's that window I was talking about earlier, where everything's organized by type. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and start collapsing some of these so you can see. So there's our floor plans, my ceiling plans. And then here's why I create the floor plans as a BIM 360 glue type, because I can see all my different floor plans here. And if I collapse this, here's all my BIM 360 glue floor plans, because they say floor plan, and then here's all my BIM 360 glue 3D views. If I want to send all of these up, I just check box those items and click next, but I'm actually just going to push this one up for the sake of time. And I click next. And then here is where your naming conventions become really, really important. So that naming convention that you agreed on in your kickoff meeting, this is where it's going to come back, and this is how we want to push it up. So for this example, level and trade are really all that was necessary, right? Now we choose, do we want to push this up as a DWF or an NWC? And this actually matters, because let me show you here. I've kind of gotten a little out of order on my slides here, but here we go. This is what we're talking about. If we choose to push an NWC or DWF up to BIM 360 glue, if somebody downloads that model, then they're downloading that DWF or NWC version. You won't be able to export NWCs unless you have the NWC plugin, the export plugin, which comes with Navisworks, or you can download it separately and add it in, right? It's recommended that if you're using Revit as your management tool, then you go ahead and you get that plugin so you can work with it in NWC, because the NWC carries more data in it than the DWF does. Additionally, now in 2018, you can bring that NWC directly into your Revit model. So you can pull down a copy of the latest, greatest version of the mechanical model, plug it into your structural model, and you can use that as you're working if you don't have access to the source Revit file. And then here, this is where we pick our folder from previously. I would just drop this in my architectural folder. And at this point, I'm ready to glue it. Now, the name here, so as long as you're strict about your naming convention, this will just version up, right? So this is why I harp on naming conventions. If you're in a position where you're aggregating models for other people, say you're a general contractor and you've got half of your team is modeling and working directly in Glue, but you've got another modeling team member that's just sending you their periodic updates of their model, right? You can push those models directly up to BIM 360 Glue via the model upload tool. Come over here to the model upload tool. So I could just click add models or upload models, but if I want it to version up, I have to use the exact same naming convention, right? So this is why naming conventions are so important in BIM 360 Glue. And that way it just versions up. Now, once I do this, it will remember for this model, it will remember the name and the location, and it will ask me if I want to upgrade the model or if I want to save a new copy of the model, right? Generally, you would update it that way that everyone has the latest and greatest. Last thing to note, and this is really important as far as the information you're pushing up, if you do have somebody else's model linked in, do not include their linked file when you push it back up. Otherwise, you're literally duplicating that data in the coordination effort. Additionally, down here where it says not include construction parts, that's if you're using parts. The shared coordinates, you've got shared coordinates and project internal. It defaults to shared coordinates, and 99% of the time, that's what you're going to use because everyone is using the architectural model to set their coordinates for their design models, right? So you can generally just leave this as shared coordinates. The only time it matters is if you are using it really matters if you're using a mixed medium of like AutoCAD and Revit. And this is where we can go in and we can control this. And if it's wrong, you can manually overwrite it in BIM 360 Glue. So I'm not going to upload this right now in the middle of the webinar. I'm just going to kind of cancel out of this. And let me check the chat box. Any questions so far about model updating or Revit setup?
Nothing yet, Dan.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll just keep on moving. Just go ahead and throw those questions up whenever they come in, right? Let me jump back to here. Here we go. So that was the part about NWCs versus DWFs. Now, let's talk about our merged model management. Now, this is by no means the only way to organize your models, but when I am setting up a project, I generally have two primary folders. I have a Federated Models folder, and then I have a Subcontractors folder. The Federated Models folder will have my Federated Models. It'll have like my level 1 with all my trades brought together. It'll have, the big monster file that has all of the like one giant federated model brought together, right? And the idea is we're not using that folder for our day-to-day work, right? We're actually using that for tracking and coordination. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is in BIM 360 Glue, in that merged model under that Federated Models folder. So if this is my architecture, let me come down here to my level 1. Here's my level 1 Federated model. It's going to have all my trades brought in. This is going to have the models already coordinated. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this model as my tracking model. So if I'm tracking HVAC versus plumbing, if I'm using this to track I use this model to track all my issues, right? So I'll have a clash test, and this is sort of serves as the master reporting clash test, right? So currently HVAC versus plumbing is not an issue, right? And I would have a test for each one of my trades that I'm tracking, right? So that's what I mean when I say we're going to be using the federated models for tracking and coordination. So this is, when I say coordination, this is going to be the coordination effort. Like, these are the models when the team has to come together to work. That's where we're going to be working. This also means in that same model, under our views and our markups, we're going to use shared views to manage our different workflows and to manage our communications, right? So the first thing I would do is I would come in here and create an RFI folder. And then within that, I'm going to add another folder. We'll call it 01, open issues. Right click, pick it, add a folder, and we're going to call it 02, closed. Right? So whenever I create a markup, it goes into the level 1, it goes into this RFI open folder, and then we track on that markup using our markup workflows, and we drag that up to close whenever it becomes closed, right? So that everyone in the team can see where we are on that issue, right? Or we could have another folder just called issues, and this is where our issue items go. So the idea, though, is this is our formal documentation. This is where the rubber meets the road as far as coordination goes. The entire project team relies on this federated model for the dissemination and coordination of information, right? But we're still using another folder called subcontractors, and this is for the trade use. This is for the day-to-day use. And the idea here is that the HVAC contractor and the plumbing contractor and the structural contractor all have their own folder that they work in. That way they can bring together models however they see fit. They can run as many different clash tests as they want. They can document items, send those notifications out to people from their own working files, right? And this gives them a separate sandbox to work in, so that as they're resolving issues, when it comes to 8 a.m. on Friday, when we're going to have our coordination meeting, all we have to do as a BIM manager is go in, update the clash tests on our federated models, give them a once-over, and then we have the latest and greatest version, or the latest and greatest results from our efforts that week. Awesome. So it looks like there's no questions coming in yet, so I'm going to keep on moving. So the next thing we're going to talk about is clash tests. Clash tests and setting up your clash tests are really, really important. So over here in BIM 360 Glue, what I've done is I've set up a couple clash tests already in my federated model. Let me go for my all federated one. Here we go. So this is my behemoth model. This has my entire building brought together. You can see all 6 floors there. If I expand the model tab, you can see I've got an all architecture and all HVAC, all structure, all plumbing, right? So what I've done is, in addition to pushing up a level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4 for each of my trades is also pushing up a collective model, right? Then that only works if you don't have your Revit model broken down into smaller parts, right? You may not be able to do this based on your project complexity. But then the idea here is I can come in here, and in my markups, here are all my pending issues, or in my views, I'm using views as a method for creating documentation for my RFIs, as well as I like using views as navigation. So what do I mean by this? What I mean is, what I'll do is I'll generally have some typical views that we need, like a southwest view, and I'll add a shared view here for this southwest view. And this is just going to be southwest all. And I'm going to save this to the project for everyone to see. And I drop that right here in my navigation. So now, as I'm navigating through my model, I can get back to those views quickly. And that's just sort of a navigation, or getting back to a starting point, right? These views retain their hidden item properties. So items that you hide in BIM 360 Glue. If I come over here and I pick this green roof, these green roof elements and I hide these, then I create my view, that view will be created with those objects hidden. So it retains that. So every time I go back to it, that object's hidden, right? So it's a good thing. It's useful for like roofs and things like that. You can get those out of the way. And you can do the same thing with section cuts as well, right? So if we know that we traditionally need a section box for level 1, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to box, and now I would use my I'd use my tool here to control a section box of my building. So if I just need a sliver for coordination purposes, this becomes my level 1 plenum coordination model, right? And then this, I just save this view, give it a name, level 1 plenum. So if I ever need to get to this view, that's the use of views, right? Looks like we don't have any questions coming in, so I'm going to keep moving forward. What's the next thing I want to talk about? Oh, yes. So clash test. So as we're bringing these objects together, we're setting up our clash tests, right? So I'm going to come over here to my clash tests, and I have my HVAC and structural clash test right here. And I can see here I have over 1,200 constructability issues in my building, and I need to start resolving these. But there's a trick to setting up these clash tests. When I'm setting up these clash tests, first off, I want to make sure I don't forget about tolerance. It's really important to have your tolerance set above 0, or otherwise you're going to get a lot of false positives, especially where you've got like diffusers and light fixtures touching each other, and things like that. So you want to make sure you set your tolerance above 0. So typically what I recommend is if you're doing, you kind of do this in an iterative process, run this through a slightly higher tolerance of like a ½ inch, right? And that'll give you a large bulk of your items that you can work through and resolve. And then once you've resolved all your issues at a ½ inch, you can drop down to an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch or whatever you need to get a more precise control, right? Some people like that. Some people say, no, we'll just do a 1 pass at a 1/16 of an inch, and then we're just going to kind of struggle through having this massive outlay of issues or clashes that we're working through. So when you're setting up your models, it's important. And here's one of those thinking about the end in mind. Ultimately, we're going to have to go back to Revit to resolve this issue because glue doesn't actually resolve issues. It provides a coordination platform. So that's why I created this slide. It's important to understand when we're going to go back from glue into Revit, red versus green, right? What we're comparing to what we're comparing against. So in this example, I have the red models on the left of my clash window and the green models on the right of my clash window. The red object is the object that I, as the modeler, am concerned with, i.e. I would go into my Revit model, and in this case, this is going to be a mechanical example. The mechanical object is the one that's going to move, not the structural steel. So that's why I want to make sure that my mechanical responsibility or my modeling responsibility is chosen on the left versus the object I'm comparing it to on the right, which is green. You can see that down here, this is the window from the Clash Pinpoint tool that says, hey, this is the object I'm editing here on the right against this object here on the, this is the object I'm editing on the left under red versus the object green on the right, which is the static object, right? So that's why setting up your BIM 360 glue clash test matters. You don't want to just come in here and just arbitrarily put these together, right? And this is where your naming convention becomes really, really important, because as I have lots and lots of clash coordination models, I want to make sure that I understand here in my naming convention where it says HVAC versus structural, that HVAC is implied to be the red object because it's left, it's first in the title, versus the structural object, which is not going to be used, right? That's the one that's not going to be edited. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start opening the HVAC model so you can see. So give me just 1 second here. I'm over on the sidebar. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the HVAC model so you can see this. There we go. So we're in our clash coordination process. We're looking at these coordination issues. It helps to come in here and group your items by model. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to group my objects by the HVAC model. And now you can see in my clash tests here, my test results, I have objects grouped together. Now, if these dots get in the way, because they do kill your fidelity, you can toggle them off with that tool. And now I can see my objects as groups, right? So I know as the HVAC designer, okay, if I can move this duct or I can resolve this one duct collision here, then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 objects done, right? So then what I would do is I come over here, I would check the object, and you have to review the object, and you have to tell BIM 360 Glue that you've looked at these clashes, which can be in the process of adding a comment or adding a markup. So I'm just going to do is I'm going to add a comment to this. I'm going to say drop duct 18 inches and save. So now that I've done that, you can see in my clash results, it's been reviewed. And if I were to actually come in here and I can use these filters to control whether or not I'm viewing like once an object has been viewed, if it filters out. So if I come up here and I can control how I'm viewing these. So when these objects become closed or resolved, they go away off the list. I'm only looking at my open items. If you're not familiar with what ignore does, ignore doesn't fully ignore a clash. What it does is it says, all right, it's being ignored, but if either object in that ignored clash changes, I'm going to make it open again. All right. So if you had a wall diffuser and a light fixture that were in conflict, but in reality, oh, there's plenty of room, that's not really an issue, we can ignore it. But if that light fixture moves and it becomes a conflict or it stays in conflict, then it becomes open again because the team needs to resolve that, right? So BIM 360 Glue is always kind of tracking what's going on with our clash tests. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back over here to Revit, and we're going to find that exact clash. So I'm going to come over here to my add-ins, and I'm going to my clash pinpoint. And now all I have to do is I just have to find, I'm going to go back into the project here. So this is the same process where you go to host, you go to project, you pick the model. So I'm going into this model. And then there's my HVAC versus structural results. I want to view these. So here is my list of all the reviewed clash issues from that test. This is just the HVAC versus structural. And if I want to view one of these, all I have to do is pick one and say view selected. And where to go? Let me go back to show model. Hold on just one second. I probably wasn't on the first floor. So I'm in my HVAC all model, which will have my entire building. There we go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say, all right, this clash, this number 991, I want to see it. And there it goes. So now I've isolated from a clash. I don't know why 991 wasn't showing back up, but you check the clashes you want to see, click view selected, and it will show you the object isolated in the model. And the whole purpose of this is just so we can get to that object that's in clash. And then when I click show model, if I was working in just the correct level, like level 1, level 2, I would just see that object, but I can see it in context with my structural steel, which is the object that it's clashing with. So let me go ahead and click view selected. I want to show you again real quick without all of this this spaghetti in the way. If I grab this object, I can look at its properties and see that it's on level 5 over here on the left. So I'm going to jump to my level 5 HVAC model. I click View Selected one more time, and there it is. There's my level 5 duct that's in Clash, and now when I say Show Model, it shows me the object right there, and all I have to do is go to my Visibility Graphics and turn on my structural items. Let me turn on these structural items so you can see this. And now I'm working on just that object, right? I know it was a little cumbersome there, I kind of fumbled through it a little bit, but the idea is you review the Clash in Glue, and the act of reviewing that Clash in View, the act of reviewing that Clash in Glue makes it available for the Clash Pinpoint tool here in Revit or AutoCAD, and I can go directly to that object. So traditionally what I would be doing is I would be doing this in the level 5 model, so that in level 5 we review it for just our level 5 coordination efforts, and then I come in here and I say, all right, level 5 HVAC model, show me the ducts that are in Clash, and I can go through and I can adjust these. And then once I make these revisions, I go through, I drop this duct down, I resolve the issue. All I have to do is go back to Glue, and I'm going to push, see it automatically has my working view selected, and I'm going to push that back up to the HVAC model, and there it goes. Just make sure that if you've got that structural model linked in, you do not push up the linked structural model as well, right? All right, so it doesn't seem like there's any questions on the board right now, so we're going to go ahead and keep moving forward. So just a couple final helpful tips. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. We've got some renovations going on in the office, and all right. So just a couple final tips here. As far as the process of updating your model goes, you want to update your model when it's relevant, i.e., when you are. So as a mechanical modeler, if I'm going through and I'm resolving issues, or as an electrical modeler and I'm going through and I'm moving my conduits around, that way my runs aren't in clash, I can do those throughout the week. I don't have to update every single time I'm in Revit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fix those issues, and then I'm going to glue periodically throughout the week. Right? I don't necessarily have to do it every single time. It is a very fast workflow, especially compared to previously, but we don't have to do it every single time. Right? We can just go through and we can focus on just our model, which is why, as an electrical contractor or electrical modeler, I have a folder for my use. It's my sandbox. I can use it as much as I want. And within that folder, if I need to coordinate with another trade to resolve an issue, I can use that folder to push out notifications to other people so I can share those views with people, right? You do want to use local copies of other people's models, which means you will be downloading copies of other people's models, right? And in 2018, now we can import the NWC models, right? If you are working with somebody who's using the DWF format, there's all kinds of workarounds to getting that done, because you can't currently import a DWF directly into Revit at this time, but you can use AutoCAD or other programs to work around that. Document everything. And what do I mean by that? You want to use your views, your markups, and your clashes to document your entire process. So we've all seen that workflow where we've created a clash or we've created a markup and we send that to somebody and then they mark it back up and they send it back, right? You want to do that. Everything that happens in BIM 360 Glue should be documented on the model, because the model literally becomes a canvas for your coordination work. And that's the whole purpose of having these different functions, these different tools, right? Most clashes will be resolved independently, i.e. the bulk of your clash and coordination issues are just going to be onesie twosie items that you resolve, saving those big ticket issues for the coordination meetings. i.e. that way the BIM manager and the project team can focus on the big items that we need to focus on, i.e. getting RFIs resolved, documenting issues as a team, so that is all taken care of. right? And then last but not least, I want to talk about some helpful options, right? Because I'm getting short on time here. These are some of the more helpful options in BIM 360 Glue, which you may not be completely aware of, but I do want to show them to you. They're all located here under the Options button in the upper right-hand corner. You'll see your little icon or your initials. You click on that and you click on Options. And from here, this is how I can control the behavior and the layout of BIM 360 Glue. First and foremost, if you wreck your toolbars or for some reason they just aren't appearing up on your screen, hit this toolbar defaults button. This resets the interface back to its default configuration. This is really pertinent if you are like me and you go from a docked laptop to a laptop freestanding for demos. Sometimes the windows get sort of out of whack and then you can't get them to show up. Use this button to bring any of those toolbars that are on there back, right? If they vanish. So in the background, this is how we can control our horizon. And then in the advanced, there's a couple of things I wanted to touch on. So a lot of people ask me, well, how do I get the materials in Revit to appear in BIM 360 Glue? And the trick is right here. You click on Display Materials, and it will show those materials, but there's a catch to it. It works really, really well with the out-of-the-box or the prefab Autodesk materials library, right? Because remember, all the products that are produced by Autodesk, the Navisworks, the Revit, the AutoCAD, the Inventor, they all use the same material library, and this provides us material consistency across platforms. Same thing when we go to the cloud. Those materials are in the cloud, and it can get to those quickly. With custom materials or materials that you make from scratch, it's a little bit more difficult. You can't currently push those up to the cloud, or they may not come in embedded in the object correctly, right? Hardware acceleration, you can turn that on or off. It does have a tendency to cause a lot of issues. And then a lot of people get kind of caught up on the fluidness of the interface, and you can change the frame rate. But just remember that as the frame rate goes up, the load on your GPU is going to go up as well, right? And then finally, if you're not clear about what the prefetch is, this is where the BIM 360 Glue will start loading the model into the large model viewer, and you can actually start navigating it before it finishes loading the entire model in, right? And this is how you can control that. And sometimes going through and clearing out your cache will improve your performance. So just a couple key helpful options and settings that you can go through and toggle on and off to help your coordination effort. So with all that being said, I'm going to go ahead and open the floor up for our last 5 minutes here. Any questions that somebody may have? Anything come in on the line, David?
No, I have not seen any questions come through. If anyone does have questions, whether it's technical or pricing related, whatever it may be, Dan and I both work in our Charlotte office, though of course we work for our clients throughout the Carolinas and beyond. But if you do have any questions, you can ask for either Dan Warren or myself, David Pace, by reaching out to our Charlotte office, which is 704-527-7881. Again, that's 704-527-7881. But again, Dan, here on my end, I'm not seeing any questions that have come through.
Awesome. Well, if there are no questions, then we will go ahead and sign out for the day. I want to thank everyone for your time. Of course, if you have any questions and you think of them, feel free to email us. Thanks for your time today, and I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.